They said, "You eat, but don't help." And just like that, I stood up and walked away from the table. I didn't slam anything. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just left the room, quietly, like someone who'd heard enough. Later, I would call the realtor. By sunset, there were 3 offers on the house they thought I had no claim to. They thought I had nowhere to go. But they didn't know the full story, because they never asked. It was just a regular Tuesday. The kind where the evening smells faintly of reheated leftovers and the light outside is already starting to fade by dinner time. I had made meatloaf earlier, the way they liked it, and set the table while my joints ached in quiet protest. Jason, my son, sat across from me, his head down, shoveling food in his mouth like the silence was too thick to breathe through. And then Samantha, his wife, spoke. "He eats like a pig and does nothing," she said, nodding toward her own son, my grandson. "And I'm not her babysitter, so maybe she should take the hint and get out before I have to kick her out." Her words weren't tired or frustrated. They were sharp, meant to cut, and they did. They dropped into the room like a hammer, cracking through the stillness of clinking forks and sleepy chewing. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. I glanced at Jason, waiting for him to say something. Anything. A glance, a shake of his head, even a muttered, "That's enough." But nothing. He just kept eating, like I wasn't even there. Even my grandson paused, his little eyes darting around the table, trying to make sense of the tension. He couldn't understand the words, not fully, but kids always know when something's wrong. The air was thick, bitter, like something burning on the stove you can't see but can't ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't explain how arthritis makes every step feel like a mountain climb. How my hands stiffen up just trying to grip a sponge. I didn't remind them I cooked when I could, folded laundry when my fingers weren't swollen, or that I'd raised Jason alone after his father passed. I didn't beg them to remember. Instead, I picked up the plates, one by one. Quiet, calm, dignified. Because I've swallowed worse things in my life than cruel words over dinner. That night, I lay in what they called the guest room. It wasn't really a room. It used to be storage. A twin bed, no closet, one tiny window that was too high to look out of. The ceiling fan above me clicked every few seconds, loud and rhythmic, like a reminder that sleep would be staying somewhere else tonight. From the living room, I could hear laughter. Jason and Samantha, their wine glasses clinking, some late-night sitcom playing. My grandson was already in bed. And me? I just lay there, listening, not to the jokes, not to the laughter, but to the silence inside me. That place where something had finally gone still. Not broken, but still. I didn't leave the next morning. That would have been too easy, too obvious. No, I made coffee like I always did. I folded the laundry, picked up the toys from the stairs, sewed a button back onto my grandson's jacket. I said nothing. 2 days later, they packed their bags for a weekend getaway. Samantha mentioned needing space. Jason didn't even look at me. That's when I packed. Just one suitcase, a few documents, my rosary, and a leather-bound notebook my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't leave a note. Just placed my house key on the kitchen table next to a clean dish towel I had folded that morning. I didn't call a cab. I took the bus. Just me and my aching knees. The care home wasn't much. Cheap, modest, but clean. It didn't reek of sadness or antiseptic. The receptionist didn't ask why I was there. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she'd seen this kind of goodbye too many times. I just like the peace and quiet, I told her. It's temporary. She smiled like she knew better. That night, I sat on the bed in my new room. The smell of bleach and boiled vegetables lingering in the air. I stared out the window. There wasn't much to see, just a shadow of a tree, reaching its arms across the glass like it wanted to come inside and keep me company. And I wondered, for the first time, was I really just a burden? Had I become someone they only saw as another mouth to feed? That thought sat heavy on my chest, but as the night wore on, something else stirred. A voice, quiet and familiar. One I hadn't heard in years. One that whispered, "What if they're wrong?" The next morning, I made tea, strong and dark, just the way I liked it. Wrapped myself in the blanket I had crocheted 2 winters ago, and I made a call. "James?" I said, my voice barely steady. "Do you remember the house deed?" James was my husband's oldest friend, our lawyer back in the day. He helped with the will, the insurance, all the hard paperwork after the diagnosis. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I remember everything." 3 days later, I was in his office, same old books, same leather chairs, same smell of dust and old paper. He handed me a folder. "You should have received a copy," he said. There it was. My name, my signature, my husband's signature. The house deed. Dated June 12th, 1994. The house I had been told to leave, the house I had once built a life in, had legally been mine for over 30 years. "I never told them," I whispered. James smiled softly. "Maybe now is the time." I didn't know exactly what I'd do with this information, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not just someone who ate, and I wasn't about to let that be the last thing they remembered about me. 3 days after I left the house, I stood in front of a building I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. The same brass letters still hung over the door. James Callahan, attorney at law. James had been more than just our lawyer. He was my husband's best friend. They played baseball together as boys, studied at the same university, even stood next to each other at our wedding. When cancer came and everything changed, James helped us get our affairs in order. The wills, the insurance, the transfer of the deed. I walked into his office, sat in the same cracked leather chair I had once cried in, and said nothing. He poured me a cup of tea. 2 sugars, no milk. He remembered. "You want me to pull the deed?" he said, not asked. I nodded. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a manila folder so thick it looked like it held decades. When he slid it across the desk, it felt like something sacred. There it was, my name, the house address, my husband's shaky signature. Dated and notarized. Legal, absolute. I stared at it like it was a photograph of someone I had once loved and almost forgotten. "He followed through," I whispered. James nodded. "He came in the week after he got the diagnosis. Said he didn't want you to ever be left without a place to go. Said, and I quote, 'She built this family. She should never have to ask to stay in her own home.'" My hand pressed to my chest, not in grief, but in awe. Even when he was dying, my husband had thought of me, not in some sentimental way, but in the most practical, protective way love can take. "I never told Jason," I admitted. James didn't blink. "Did you think you'd never need to?" I paused. "I thought they'd remember who I was." James nodded slowly. "I've kept it updated every year, just in case," he said. "Taxes, filings, everything's airtight." I looked back down at the document. I had known deep in my bones that I wasn't a guest in that house, but seeing it there, in ink and legal stamp, was like someone reached back through time and handed me back a truth I had almost let go of. I hadn't been living in their house, they had been living in mine. "I want to sell it," I said, calm, steady. "I'll draw up the paperwork," James said. Quietly, I added. "No calls, no notice. Let them hear it from the letter." He didn't ask why. I walked out of that office with the folder hugged to my chest. The sky smelled like rain and exhaust. A bus passed, people going somewhere, maybe home, and inside me, something settled. Not revenge, not anger, balance. That night, I returned to the care home carrying 2 things. A paper bag of pastries for the kitchen staff, and a small bouquet for Helen, the woman who lived down the hall. She once confessed that her daughter-in-law made her eat alone in the laundry room. Just like me, Helen had a story no one wanted to hear. We drank tea in silence. Later, in my room, I opened the folder again, laid it on my narrow bed, and read every line like it was scripture. My husband had signed that deed with love. I would sell it with clarity. And they would learn I wasn't just someone who ate. 6 months passed. The seasons changed. Leaves turned gold. The air cooled. I almost forgot about the house entirely until James called. "It's done," he said. "Escrow closed. Funds cleared. You'll get the statement in a couple of days." I thanked him, hung up the phone, and waited. It didn't take long. That Sunday, Jason called. I didn't answer. Then again. And again. Finally, I texted. The transfer was legal. The house was mine. I simply took back the meal I once paid for. There was silence for a full day. Then it came. Samantha's voice, shrill and cracked with disbelief. "You evil old woman! You sold our house! This was our home!" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap. "No," I said. "It was my home. You just lived there, rent-free, like I once fed you both. Now, it's someone else's turn." She hung up. No apology, no tears, just fury. I stood by the window of Haven House that evening. Lights flickered across the garden. Somewhere down the hall, Helen hummed a hymn under her breath, out of tune, but not out of heart. I didn't expect it to feel like this. Not triumphant, not even bittersweet, just still. The next day, Jason called again. This time, his voice was quiet, tired, like the boy I once knew had found his way to the surface again. "Mom," he whispered, "we're going to lose everything. Samantha's gone. She said I should have defended you. I should have. I didn't know what to do. I messed up." I let him speak. Let him pour out everything he never said when it would have mattered most. When he finally went quiet, I said the words I had practiced in the silence of my small room. "I'm not taking anything from you, Jason. I'm just reclaiming what you thought I had forgotten." There was a pause. "Is there any way to undo it?" he asked. A child's voice, wrapped in an adult's regret. "I gave everything to raise you, and I never kept score. But when your wife called me a burden and you said nothing, something inside me changed." Another pause. "I don't want your money," I continued. "I don't even want an apology. I just want my silence back. And this is how I earn it." The line went dead. And that was okay, because I had said what needed to be said. I didn't rescue him. I didn't cushion the fall. For once in my life, I stood up, not to scold, not to forgive, but to simply claim my place. That night, I made a cup of tea, the same kind I used to serve him with pancakes on Sundays. And for the first time in years, the sweetness was mine alone. Because peace, like justice, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just arrives. There's a drawer in every mother's life that holds more than it seems. Mine is small, wooden, tucked beneath a dusty lamp in the corner of my room at Haven House. It holds birthday cards, prayer beads, a rosary, some faded photos, and one leather-bound notebook. My husband gave it to me on our 25th anniversary. On the first page, in his handwriting, it read, "For the things we never want to forget." At first, it was for grocery lists, recipes, notes from Sunday sermons, a reminder to pick up thread or send a thank you card. But over time, it changed, became something else. A quiet ledger of all I had given. That evening, after Samantha's voice had stopped ringing in my ears and Jason's regret had faded into silence, I opened that drawer again. The notebook smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. I turned the pages. 1994. Jason's tuition after he dropped out. $2,300. 1996. Co-signed the car loan. Paid the first 5 months. $1,800. 1999. Emergency room bill. Jason didn't want Samantha's insurance to cover it. $740. 2001. Wedding gift. So they could have a real honeymoon. $5,000. 2005. Covered rent for 3 months during unemployment. $3,600. 2008. Bought crib and stroller for first grandchild. $1,200. It went on. 2011, down payment for their second car, $4,000. 2013, replaced their water heater, $50. 2015, helped with IVF, $7,000. 2020, pandemic groceries for 5 months, $4,500. Over $120,000, and those were just the things I remembered. Not counted were the thousands of small, invisible kindnesses. The meals, the babysitting, the sleepless nights. I whispered to myself, I used to give without keeping track. But they made me start counting, and that broke my heart. Not because I regretted it, but because they acted like it had never happened. The next day, I made copies of every page, labeled and organized them. Then I handed them to James, my lawyer, as part of a living will. This isn't for revenge, I told him. It's so that if they ever ask why, I won't have to say a word. The numbers will speak for themselves. He looked at me, nodded, and said gently, You're not wrong, Ruth. You're just finally being honest about what it cost. That night, I placed the original notebook back in its drawer. But I added one final entry. 2023, sold the house, built Haven House. For women like me, value, $0. Interest earned, immeasurable. I whispered aloud. They thought I was just an old woman who ate without giving. But I fed them for decades. And now, I'm feeding myself. And when the house sold, the money didn't feel like a prize. It felt like closure. I didn't spend it on revenge. I didn't spend it on cruises or clothes. I didn't want to teach them a lesson. I wanted to build something that would speak louder than my pain. So I went looking, not for a retirement home, for purpose. On the east side of town, I found it. A rundown 4-unit building with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and good bones. The kind of place that felt waiting. The real estate agent gave me a strange look. Most folks your age are looking for comfort. This isn't exactly luxury, she said. I'm not looking for luxury, I replied. I'm looking for use. I bought it that day. Then I gave it a name, Haven House. And below that, I had a plaque engraved. No one here proves their worth to stay. I didn't want it to be a shelter. I wanted it to be a balm. For women like me, for Helen, for the invisible, women who had been tolerated, not treasured, dismissed, not heard. It took weeks to clean it up. I hired Tommy, a young handyman whose mother had been in a care home. He worked weekends for free once he heard the story. You're building something good, he said. Feels rare these days. We scrubbed and painted. We turned old bathtubs into herb gardens. We bought soft chairs and good lighting. We made it feel warm, like you were being welcomed, not warehoused. I invited Helen to be the first resident. She cried when she saw it. You didn't forget me, she whispered. Of course not, I said. We remember the forgotten here. Then came Miss B, a former school teacher who still corrected our grammar with a wink. Then Marion, who used to run a flower shop and now grew basil like it was sacred. Then Roland, our first man, a widower, who made the best stew you've ever tasted. We weren't just residents. We were a small tribe. A quiet force of survivors rediscovering our strength. I became the unofficial manager. I bought groceries, helped organize doctor visits, read letters for the vision impaired. On Thursdays, I read the local paper aloud. On Sundays, we played old records and danced in our socks. One day, while slicing tomatoes in the kitchen, Roland looked up and said, You know, we're alive today because someone once called you a leech. I froze for a second, then let out a laugh. One of those deep, stunned, slightly aching laughs. He nodded. You turned pain into shelter. That's more than most ever manage. That night, I wrote a new line in my notebook. They called me a burden, but with the money from that burden, I'm feeding 4 souls who now sleep in peace. And at Haven House, we didn't lock our bedroom doors. Not because we didn't value privacy, but because we trusted each other, more than we had ever trusted our own families. One evening, as the sun melted into the porch beams, I stood with Helen, our mugs of chamomile tea in hand. It's all right to be happy again, she said. You're not alone, I replied. She smiled. Neither are you. And for once, I believed her. Because Haven House wasn't just bricks and beds. It was a declaration. We were not burdens. We were not leftovers. We were women who had given too much for too long. And now we were finally home. He came to see me a year later, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with the kind of silence that only comes when a man has lost more than he's ready to admit. I recognized him instantly. He looked older, yes, but not just by years. He looked worn down by regret. His shoulders hunched, his hands tucked awkwardly in his coat pockets. His voice, when it finally came, was a quiet murmur. I know I don't deserve to be here. I didn't say a word, just motioned for him to sit. We lost the house, he continued. Samantha left. She said I should have fought harder, and maybe she's right. But back then, Mom, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to stand up. His voice cracked on that last word. Mom, we have nothing now. I sleep on a friend's couch. I work nights. I just came to say thank you. For everything I never said thank you for. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I reached into a small wooden box beside my chair and pulled out an old photo. It showed the early days of Haven House. The porch still needed paint. The garden hadn't bloomed yet. But in the center were 4 of us, laughing, barefoot, holding paintbrushes, a house becoming a home. I handed it to him. He stared at it, puzzled at first. You built this? He asked softly. With the money from our house? I nodded. And you didn't spend it on yourself. I shook my head. I spent it on something that could grow. He looked back down at the photo, then up at me. Why are you telling me this now? I took a breath and said what I'd rehearsed a dozen times in my heart. Because I ate your rice for 1 year, Jason. But you ate mine for 30. I'm just collecting a little interest. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came. I stood up. My knees ached more these days, but I stood tall. I didn't come here to hurt you, he finally said. I know, I replied. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything I never thanked you for. I studied his face, the stubble on his chin, the lines etched around his eyes, the worry that lived in his shoulders. There's something you still need to understand, I said gently. I never needed repayment. I needed respect. I needed to know that my years hadn't vanished just because my hands started shaking. That the woman who once held your fevered head wasn't disposable now that she needed help opening a jar. He lowered his gaze. I forgot who you were, he whispered. No, I said. You remembered. But too late. There was a pause, then the question I knew was coming. Can I help? With the house? With the other residents? I shook my head. This place doesn't need your guilt. It needs your growth. Live better. Love better. That's how you honor what I gave. He nodded, slow and quiet. As he rose to leave, I reached back into the box and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I handed it to him. It wasn't a legal document, not a will or a deed. It was a blank page. This is the deed to your own future, I said. Go fill it with something worthy. He held it like it was gold. I will, he whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed him. It was a quiet spring afternoon. The kind where time moves slowly, like even the breeze doesn't have anywhere to be. The sun filtered through the trees, laying soft gold on the gravel path and coaxing warmth out of the porch floorboards. I sat in my favorite chair, teacup in hand. It was chipped at the rim, just a little, but it still fit my palm perfectly. Out in the garden, Helen was arguing with Roland again, this time about green beans. Boil or sauté, garlic or bacon fat. Miss B sat on the swing, knitting a scarf for someone who hadn't asked, but would surely be grateful all the same. From the kitchen, someone had started humming an old hymn, off-key but full of soul. You might think this place is a care home. You'd be wrong. This wasn't a place where people came to be taken care of. This was a place where people came to remember they still mattered, to belong, to laugh without fear, to be seen again after years of fading into the corners. A woman approached the gate, thin, elegant, wearing a Sunday hat too formal for a Tuesday. She walked like someone who used to wear heels even when she didn't need to. She climbed the porch stairs, and sat beside me without asking. "Are you the owner?" she asked. I nodded. She looked around. The chipped bird bath, the wind chimes made of cutlery and glass beads, the riot of mismatched flowers. "This place feels free," she said, almost like a confession. She studied my face, the lines, the tremor in my hand, the softness that used to be steel. "Why don't you live with your children?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. I didn't answer right away. I let the question float in the space between us, light as pollen. Finally, I smiled. "I used to," I said. "But here I'm needed, not tolerated. No one here asks me to scrub floors to earn my meal. No one expects me to apologize for being alive." Her eyes softened, not in pity, in understanding. We sat in silence for a while. Then the kettle began to whistle, my favorite sound. It meant warmth was coming. "You don't always have to win the fight," I told her. "Sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can do." The sun dipped lower, brushed amber on every leaf, on every face, on every story still being written. And in that moment, I knew something deep in my bones. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the part where I finally started telling it in my own voice. And if you're still listening, if your chest ached while hearing any part of this, maybe you have a story too. If you've ever been called a burden, if you've ever been made to feel like your usefulness was your worth, if you've ever kept quiet just to keep the peace, let me tell you this. You are not alone. You are not broken. And you are not too late. Because here at Elder True Story, we remember out loud. We don't shout, but we are heard. And if you're ready to remember who you are, not who they said you were, not who you became to survive, but who you've always been, then you've come to the right place. You're home. Welcome to Elder True Story.